All right, we are live. Welcome everyone to today's live stream. Is the Quran a miracle? Will it amaze me as a Christian, someone outside of the faith? We will see. So, interesting thing to note, having been doing comparative religion for a while, I study a lot of different religions and I look into a lot of different philosophies and backgrounds and things like that. Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, a bunch of different things that I delve into just because I find them all interesting and fascinating to look into and, constantly trying to see what makes the most sense. When I read the Quran a couple years back, I saw there was this consistent message within the Quran, when I read it in the English at least, that there was this constant argument of the Quran in of itself is its own defense, it's its own argument. And oftentimes the beauty of the Quran was praised throughout the Quran by throughout different surahs and stuff. And so obviously that was always seemed to be an argument that was commonly put forth by the Quran. And I had a lot of requests on this channel in my comment section and different things for me to react to some of these type of videos where it's like react to why is the Quran a miracle, react to I can't think of all the videos off the top of my head, but basically all of them dealing with the fact about why the Quran is amazing. Yeah, essentially what it boiled down to. And I was like, you know what? I guess I will. I guess I will react to one of these videos. What's up, Omar? Omir? Hello. Welcome to the chat. How are you doing today? So that is what I'm going to do today. I'm going to be reacting to this video. I think I just picked one because my plan is to stop at every point, kind of give you my honest review and thoughts as a Christian, as someone from the outside. So I'm going to give you my genuine thoughts. I'm going to give you my honest thoughts on each case he makes, each point he makes, and what I think about it and all that stuff. So I'll give you my honest review and all that good stuff. And as I said in the past, I don't make a lot of these videos where I address sort of maybe the arguments for a faith or for a philosophy. I make them every once in a while. I make them occasionally. I mean, in my podcast that I used to run, which I think I'm going to bring back actually a little bit. I did a little bit more of that where I would address arguments or talk about kind of philosophies and things like that. But I don't always jump into these mainly because they can come across confrontational, and I like to keep this channel to a certain extent, comparative, friendly, a little bit more respectful. But every once in a while, you have to jump into something that's a little bit more controversial, a little bit more debated. And people, I think, as long as we do it respectfully, can have a good time. And as long as we do this respectfully and respect one another, it can be done well. So that's what I'm going to do today. Giving my honest thoughts, my honest opinions on this video, and see how it goes. See how it go. As always, I have to give my little YouTube announcements. If you like this video, leave a comment, like, and subscribe to join the community. And if you want to interact with the live chat, you need to be a subscriber. So all the people who I'm interacting with during this video on the live chat, they are subscribers. And so that's how they're able to do that on the live streams. And yeah, stuff like that. And if you obviously want to share this with friends and family, go ahead and do that. We're always looking to grow here at the channel. And yeah, trying to make a safe community for different religions to explore and to do all that type of stuff. But as I said, I'm going to give my honest opinions, my honest review, and stuff like that. So let me look what's going on in the chat already. Oh, hello, Flower. Welcome to the chat. Welcome to the chat. If you got time after it, I recommend you react to the greatest miracle of all time, the Quran by a Merciful Servant. It's about 30 minutes. I don't know if I'll have 30 minutes after all this is said and done. I have a feeling this might go on for a while because we'll probably have some back and forth conversations as well. And I think stopping at every point, kind of giving my thoughts. I think this might go out for a little bit longer, but we'll see. We'll see. But yeah, so I think without further ado, I think we'll jump right into it. We'll see how this goes and go from there. Let me know if the audio is good.
In Islam, faith is not blind. It is based off knowledge and rationality. When Muslims are asked why they believe Islam is the truth, they respond by saying the Quran is the proof.
That's what I was talking about.
But when they are asked to explain how, it can be difficult to give a satisfying answer because there is just so much that can be said. So, how is the Quran a miracle? Allah revealed a verse in the Quran affirming that He would protect His revelation from ever being corrupted 1400 years ago. If you think about it, this is a huge claim to make, yet we find the Quran remains completely unchanged after all these years.
Now, so Obviously, obviously all Muslims would believe that the Quran has been preserved for 1400 years. I believe that's about the time frame he said, and so most Muslims would believe that. The only pushback I would give at this point, I guess, for this first point that comes to my mind is that I know not all historians agree with that. Scholarly historians from atheist backgrounds, Christian backgrounds, from Buddhist backgrounds. I have heard many cases for why the Quran isn't perfectly preserved. I've even heard now this I can't verify, but I have heard there are some different Arabic translations of the Quran across the world, about 5 different ones, I think, roughly. That one is just speculation, I think, on my end, because I don't know for sure. I would have to dig into that one a little bit deeper. But I know that's not fully agreed among historians. Whether or not how deep into that historical factor I go, I could probably delve deeper. But I do know it's not agreed upon that the Quran has been perfectly preserved. Muslims obviously believe that. I mean, that's why they believe that. But not all historians from different backgrounds believe that. And some who have studied it very thoroughly, even though they're not part of the religion. So, I mean, I'm sure you could delve a little bit more deeper into that and have the debates and stuff like that. But I know that's not necessarily something that everyone agrees upon. And there's some reasons for it, because I know there's certain hadith that kind of contradict each other. There's some hadith that say some of the Quran has been lost. There's some hadith that talk about how it's been, some chapters of it have been like eaten by animals. And there was a case where at one point a kingdom took a lot of the Qurans, and there was a lot of different Qurans at the time, and they kind of like burned them and made one. So like throughout the history of the Quran, now most Muslim scholars will say they don't trust those historical renditions, or if they do trust them, they try to justify them. But all that to say, it's not necessarily agreed upon all historians that it's historically trusted. But that would be something historians would have to debate among themselves. But obviously, as a Muslim, you would believe that.
No matter where you are in the world, the Quran is one, and no two Muslims disagree. In another verse, Allah says that He has made the Quran easy to learn, and asks if there will be anyone that will learn it. Every single generation since the Quran was revealed has had memorizers, making it the only book to have passed down in human memory.
No, that's not entirely true. So, for instance, I mean, it's true that it is, I believe it's by what I understand about the Quran's history, it is true that it has been passed down orally for many years. That is true. Now, it's not the only book that's been passed down like that. So, for instance, you take the Iliad and the Odyssey, some of these Greek epics. Most of them were oral traditions passed down for generations before they were actually written down. People would literally memorize them. And that's not necessarily anything crazy, because before writing was a common thing that everyone knew, before education was more widespread, most cultures were oral. They would learn things orally, they would memorize a lot of stuff, and then regurgitate it and pass it down to their future generations. So this is common among Greek culture. Iliad, the Odyssey were all passed down orally. Even the legends of Arthur from European culture were passed down orally. You even have there have been cases of people who memorized the entire Bible. I know someone who's memorized the entire New Testament firsthand. So this idea that this would be an amazing feat isn't necessarily the case. There have been many books passed down orally for generations. Many people have memorized large swaths of literature before. So that's not necessarily, it's not the only book that has done that. Certain styles of recitations that the Prophet recited, not different Qurans. Okay, I mean, sure. I could look deeper into that, but yeah, I'm just saying that's kind of what some different historians, how they approach it.
Considering most Muslims don't understand the language, the speed at which they can learn the Quran is almost unbelievable. To give you an idea, imagine memorizing a page of Chinese in a matter of half an hour. Today, there are more than 100 million memorizers of all its 600 pages, word for word, letter for letter. You might be asking, why is the Quran in Arabic?
What I find interesting about that is a few things. One, other religions actually memorize languages that they're not accustomed to for certain religious practices. So, for instance, if you take the Catholic Church, they memorize a lot of Latin texts and Latin phrases and Latin prayers, even though most of the congregation doesn't speak Latin, because of the religious implications of it. Now, Protestants don't do that commonly, but within the Catholic Church, that's something you would commonly see. I know from actually an Anabaptist background, some people that I know, it used to be that they would memorize things in German because they would think German was an important language to memorize things in, and so the ministers and stuff would memorize large swaths of scripture, prayers, hymns in German, even though German wasn't their native tongue. And then you also have other religions that did some things like that. That's just some of the ones I'm familiar with. So that's one, not the only religion to do that. But two, the thing that I think sticks out to me the most about that argument is that it is within Islamic tradition that people are expected to memorize the Quran. It's important. It's actually praiseworthy to memorize the Quran. So it's really not that amazing to me when most Muslims, to all Muslims, memorize the Quran. If you're expected to memorize the Quran, and also if your parents do their due diligence, and at a very young age, when you're just a child growing up, get you to start memorizing the Quran and learning it and learning Arabic and things like that, it's not very shocking if you're going to memorize the Quran really rapidly. So most children can learn languages within the first few years of their life and memorize and have large vocabularies and be bilingual by the first few years in their life if they have bilingual parents who teach them both languages. Because children have an aptitude for learning really fast. So if you grew up memorizing the Quran and stuff like that, and that's expected within your religion, it's not very shocking when a lot of people memorize it, and it's not necessarily shocking if you memorize it in a different tongue, because languages all have patterns, and our brains can pick up on patterns. Quran in Arabic is only one. The translation is a different story. React to the Hajj and pilgrimage in the Bible by asking Muslims after this one. I'll see if I can get to it. As I said, I'm just going to take this video. Each case that's brought up, each point, I'll just give you my thoughts, my opinion. So I don't know how long it'll be. I don't know how long this live stream will be, but maybe I'll check out some of these other videos. Also, I think it'll be interesting because when you suggest videos and stuff, I always take them into consideration and stuff. So yeah, I'll see if I can get to them in this video or not. But I'm going to take each point from this video and just continue to give my thoughts. So we'll keep going.
Arabic if most Muslims aren't Arabs? Well, Allah tells us why in many verses. In one, He says to remove any crookedness or confusion, and in another, so that it may be perfectly clear. We now know that Arabic is one of the most eloquent languages that delivers incredible depth and precision with the least amount of words. In Arabic, one single word can translate into a full descriptive sentence. If the Quran was in English, it would have to be thousands of pages thicker, if not more, just to carry a close enough meaning. The effect...
So here's a interesting thing about this argument that I find is that, one, it's a little bit biased. I mean, you're going to prefer your native tongue. If you grew up a Muslim especially, you're going to be taught that Arabic is a beautiful language. You're going to be taught to revere Arabic. So you're automatically predisposed to thinking it's going to be great. Versus someone who's outside of the religion who isn't necessarily predisposed to thinking it's great. Or someone who doesn't even know Arabic whatsoever. They're not necessarily predisposed to think it's great, even if they hear it or not. So I think that, first of all, it's kind of just subjective. Second of all, it doesn't actually surprise me that Arabic encompasses it's a lot, I guess, shorter than English. So for instance, it'll take more English words to say the same thing as one Arabic word, as he says. That doesn't surprise me. Arabic's an older language than English, by what I understand. And older languages typically had shorter vocabularies that encompassed more meaning. So for instance, Hebrew and Greek are older languages. They date a lot further back than English does. And they are the same way. One Hebrew word encompasses a whole sentence worth of English words. One Greek word encompasses a whole sentence worth of English words. Older languages tended to be less wordy. It's just how they were. As languages evolved over time, like English being a newer language, they tended to get wordier and they tend to have more words and more precise meaning, things like that. So that doesn't necessarily shock me, but also it is sort of subjective to say this language is the most beautiful language to a certain extent. React to the Hajj, pilgrimage, Quran in Arabic is only one. Love your reactions from Algeria. From Algeria. Hey, welcome to the chat, man. Dude, it is still, I know I made this comment before in the past, but man, Algeria, it's just crazy to me. Around the world, guys. I love having you all. I love be able to have these respectful conversations with you about different religions and just learning about you guys, giving my thoughts and opinions as well, and just having these conversations. So thank you for tuning in. Glad you're enjoying the reactions. Cosmos, welcome to the chat. Love having you. Look up the channel Muslim Men Later. I'm not sure how to say that, but I might have to do that at some point. We'll see. Again, I'm going to go through this video first. We'll see where we're at from there. All right, let's hop back into it.
That the Quran has on those who listen to it being recited can easily be seen from the thousands of reaction videos on YouTube.
All right, just as a side note, again, I've listened to some philosophers defend Islam, and they're a little bit more. I think they're a little bit more sophisticated than this video. Obviously, this video is made to be 11 minutes long. You can only to make a really good point, you need to have time to make it out. But either way, I would say it's not a great defense to say, well, look at all these reaction videos online of people crying to a video. YouTube is full of people out there trying to fake something to get views. So there's tons of people on YouTube who their only goal is to appeal to an audience, give them what they want, and get views out of it, or do something. So making a dramatic reaction to a video or something like that, you can't necessarily trust is just because someone YouTube reaction. Secondly, my other point too, that even though someone doesn't understand the language, how could they end up crying? So in my past experience and some past things I've experienced in my life, there's this thing called speaking in tongues. Now, speaking in tongues, to give you the idea of what it is in some religions, in like charismatic circles in Christianity, in some mystical religions, stuff like that, there's this thing called speaking in tongues. And speaking in tongues is when people talk in a language that they don't understand what they're saying, and the people around them don't understand what they're saying. It's like its own language, basically, that they believe is coming from an angel, from God, from something holy or spiritual. And I've witnessed people supposedly talking in tongues. And while talking in tongues or in a language they don't understand, they're crying and weeping, and people around them are crying. Like, I literally experienced this firsthand. No one knows what's going on. No one knows what's being said. But people are crying. And you ask them, why are you crying? Like, what's being said? What's so meaningful and impactful about this? And they don't know. It doesn't necessarily prove that there's something holy being said. It doesn't prove that whatever happening is true. It doesn't necessarily prove anything. All it means is that they're having a religious, spiritual, emotional moment. Maybe because they want one. Maybe because they're hyping themselves up to get emotional. Maybe it's because it's just like at the moment that day, just something about it really clicks. Who knows? I'm not going to say I know why they're getting emotional. But just because someone doesn't understand something and gets emotional doesn't necessarily imply that it's something true or deeply meaningful per se.
It literally brings people to tears despite them not understanding the language. Guess what? Allah explicitly told us that people would react like this 1,400 years ago. In the 4th chapter, Allah presents an open challenge. He says, "Do they not reflect upon the Quran? If it had been from anyone other than Allah, they would have found in it much error and contradiction. 14 centuries of critics have passed, and not a single error or contradiction can be found, despite great advancements in knowledge."
Now, the interesting thing about this one, again, it's 11 minutes long, and he's trying to get through a lot of points, so he doesn't necessarily go through all the debates. But then again, as I've said, there's historians, philosophers, and critics of the Quran who claim actually it's full of contradictions. And obviously, there's debates on YouTube between people who make these debates. You have Muslim philosophers debating atheist philosophers, debating Buddhist philosophers, like different philosophers from different backgrounds, from all sorts of backgrounds, debating about whether or not the Quran is full of contradictions. So there are people who believe the Quran is full of contradictions and present compelling arguments to people outside the Quran. Because obviously, if you find the arguments uncompelling, you're going to be a Muslim. You're going to stay within Islam. If you find the arguments compelling, you're going to disagree with Islam. And you're going to not be part of the faith if you believe that there are contradictions. So again, this claim is based on the idea that as a Muslim, he believes that there's no contradictions. And he says that not a single error or contradiction have been presented. Actually, there have been many presented. It's whether or not you agree with them or you find ways to justify them or however it may be. So there are people who would disagree with this statement. Again, you would have to go into the debates and discover for yourself whether or not you believe they are actually contradictions or if they are reasonably justified by the scholars who claim they are justifiable. But again, that would be a whole debate. That's hours worth of debate right there. And obviously you can watch videos on YouTube. You can look it up, all the different debates that are on that topic. But again, this is just a statement of, oh, there's no contradiction. People claim there are. And there are many scholarly, brilliant people who study the Quran who claim there's contradictions. And again, there's debates on that topic. But all that to say, not everyone agrees with that statement.
Allah has placed many scientific subtleties in the Quran for us to reflect on. For example, the Big Bang that describes the creation of the universe starting from a single point, or the expansion of the universe that was discovered in the last 50 years. To give you an idea of how much of a breakthrough this was, Stephen Hawking said that this was one of the great intellectual revolutions of the 20th century. This was explicitly mentioned in the Quran 14 centuries ago.
Interesting. I don't have much word about that because I would have to look into that Quranic verse to know for sure what it says. I've looked into some of the different, like during my past few years of studying religions and looking into different things, more recently looking into Islam for over, I would say, the past year or two, roughly. Like a couple years ago, I started reading the Quran. I just read the Quran, basically. And in about the past year or so, I've been delving into the arguments for and against Islam and stuff like that over the past year or so. I haven't studied that one specifically, that specific scientific miracle or wonder found in the Quran. So I don't really have much to speak on that because I just haven't studied it. But I have studied some others, and I think he might. I don't know if he mentions any of those that I have actually kind of looked into a little bit, see whether or not they actually make sense or not. So I don't really have much to say about that because I haven't looked too deeply into that verse or into that science. Sometimes words have some kind of power from a spiritual way. Yeah, I agree with that. I don't actually disagree with the fact that words can be filled with some sort of spiritual power. My biggest pushback would be the fact that just because something has a spiritual power or emotional power doesn't necessarily make it true or doesn't necessarily make it that it's coming from God. It could be for multiple reasons, and it could be emotional, spiritual, psychological. It could be for multiple reasons. It doesn't necessarily indicate that something is in of itself true, because I also know people who've read the Bible, reading the Bible, or doing liturgical prayers and things who get emotional and start crying. Someone outside of Christianity won't automatically assume that Christianity is true because people get emotional over liturgical prayers that they don't understand, or over Latin prayers that they don't understand, or over the Bible readings. You don't automatically assume that it's true. You would look at other evidence. That's just my thing. Can you watch what dialogue between Muslim and Christian? Newman Khan, Ali Khan? Maybe sometime in the future I'll watch a debate. I think that would be interesting, watching a debate between Islam and Christianity in the future. Yeah, I know most debates. Partially, I will say, partially why I haven't watched too many debates on this channel yet is because they're so long. They're normally like an hour or two long. And I've listened and watched some and stuff like that on my own personal time when I'm like working or have a podcast or something on. I just haven't reacted to them too much because they're so long, and I would feel like to make a live stream out of it, I would almost have to like dedicate 2 to 3 hours of my time to do that, which maybe I will. Maybe one of these days I'll have like a special live stream day where I'm like live streaming for several hours straight. But that would be down the road, maybe. But I will consider it at least. I will look into it sometime. I just know debates tend to be really long. And if I would want to kind of interject, give opinions, or just listen or whatever, it would still take a lot of time. So that's partially why I haven't yet. But maybe down the road I'll do a special one. Every critic has been debunked. Bring me any claim right now. Is these Islamists that bring these claims? I mean, I guess as far as claims go, from a historical standpoint, things like that, I guess you could say they're debunked. I suppose if you listen to a debate and you agree with the Muslim scholars over the Christian, atheist, whatever other scholars, that would be up for you to decide, listening to those debates, listening to those historical evidence, things like that. As far as from like, I guess when it comes down to like dismantling or understanding or critiquing religion, it's hard to hyper focus on necessarily one specific point. Normally you have to kind of take into context of all the scriptures, all the context of the setting, stuff like that, and kind of build case by case. For me right now, I'm just kind of going through each point here. As far as like other people out there concerned, if you want to dig deeper into the research, my advice is always look at the pro side, the side that supports Islam, and see their cases for it. Look at the negative side. Look at people who disagree with it. Don't look up like Muslim debunks Christian. Look up Christian, makes a point as of why he doesn't believe in Islam, and then compare the two, and then maybe watch a debate video or a debunking video and get your argument. So like watch both sides and watch people argue it out, and that's kind of how I suggest people to explore these sort of topics. Look at all these different topics. Don't just listen to just Muslim scholars because obviously they have a bias and they're always going to come out looking right. You got to look at people from all different backgrounds. So for instance, actually, in my own personal life, I spent a lot of time reading atheists, Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, and different people from different backgrounds because I think it's important to try to see how each person approaches an argument and perspective, stuff like that. I have a genuine question. What makes you really Christian? What makes you believe is the truth and not any other religion? Oh boy, that would... Maybe one of these days I'll make a live stream where I do like a Q&A about why I'm a Christian or kind of, I guess, present why I'm a Christian. Again, that would be another long live stream because you could go down so many different topics. The one thing I will say about religion that I think is difficult on my end, I prefer philosophy because like within the philosophical circle, you look at things from a logical standpoint. It's just about logic versus things like history where, let's just say I reference a historical scholar. So for instance, Habermas, I think Gary Habermas is his name, is a Christian scholar. He identifies as a Christian. And he presents a historical case for why Christianity is true. So Gary Habermas, if you look up, I think his name, I'm not sure. I don't know like if any countries have restrictions on the internet or not. I'm not sure how that all works in other countries and their laws. But like Gary Habermas is a common historian that would defend Christianity, and he has many books on the topic of history. Then you have people like, I think in Islam circle, what's that guy's name? Zahir Nakir or something like that. I can see the spelling in my head. I can't necessarily say it right. Where he has his historical case for why Islam's true. And so history is one of those things where you kind of you turn to scholars. You say, here's the resources they use, and here's how they link them together from a narrative standpoint. And the question boils down to which one of those narratives make the most sense using the evidence. And so. Yeah, I think I would consider doing that sometime. I just don't know. It would take me probably a long live stream to lay out my full case as of why I'm a Christian. So I'm gonna jump back into this video, keep responding kind of to these things and stay on that topic because yeah, I'm going to try to keep this live stream to about an hour long, and I think this video is going to take me long enough. But yeah, maybe down the road I will make a live stream where I do like a Q&A or something like that. We'll see.
Signs include every living thing being made of water, and mountains as pegs, standing firm and stabilizing the earth from shaking.
This is actually one of them that, when I was talking about some of the scientific facts about the Quran that I've actually looked into a little bit, this is actually one of them. So one thing to note that I think is interesting, in the Bible, in Psalms, Job, and I think Ecclesiastes, I'm not sure about the third one. I know Psalm and Job, the mountains are described to have roots in the Bible, in Psalms and Job, and I think and there's one other book that is. So this isn't just found in the Quran. This is also found in the Bible where mountains are described to have roots. Secondly, as far as it's concerned about the mountains' roots stabilizing the earth, that's not entirely true. Mountains' roots aren't the ones stabilizing the earth. That has more to do with tectonic plates and stuff like that. But the roots themselves have very little to do with the stabilization of the earth. But this is also found in the Bible, interestingly enough. Do you feel like we are in the end times in both Islamic view and Christian too? From my humble perspective, it's too near if only the people knew. I agree. Also, there was one right above it. My bad, Flower. I agree with the importance of the context. That's why I try to be fair and do go and see resources. Most of the time, I can't side with the Christianity. Take pornography in the Bible, for example. I've heard about the whole thing about pornography in the Bible. I'm assuming you're referring to Song of Solomon. I'm not sure what else you'd be referring to. Maybe Song of Solomon? You'd have to let me know what you refer to when you say pornography in the Bible. I've heard about it. I never actually looked into it too deeply. Now, having read the whole Bible, only thing I could potentially think that someone called pornographic, quote unquote, would be the Song of Solomon. That's the only thing I could think off the top of my head that you would describe as pornographic. Although pornography in my head has a very specific definition, which would be explicit visual material designed to elicit lust. But anyway, you would have to tell me what you mean exactly when you say pornography in the Bible. As far as your question, Cosmos, do I feel like it's near the end times? So I will be honest with you. Since no human out there knows when the end times is going to be, all you can do is speculate. All you can do is speculate about when the end times is coming. No matter what faith you're from, no matter what perspective you're from, even if you're an atheist, there's no one who knows when the world's going to end. Now, as religious people, you believe that God's going to bring the world to an end in some way, shape, or form in most cases. But as far as like atheists, the world's going to end on natural causes, whatever. But no one really knows. So I'm going to be honest with you. I try to spend little time speculating about whether or not we're living in the end times. To me, that's not the important question. To me, the important question is, while I'm still alive, what is true? And I'm going to continually pursue the truth and not worry that much about whether or not I'm living in the end times. Because at the end of the day, if I'm prepared to die, I'm prepared for the end times as well. So prepare yourself by seeking out truth, and prepare yourself so that you're able to die and die knowing the truth. Because at the end of the day, when the end times come, it's just going to mean your death and your finality as well. So that's just kind of why I don't really delve into whether or not I think it's the end times. I mean, people thought it was the end times hundreds and thousands of years ago. I mean, not hundreds of thousands of years ago. Like thousands of years ago, people thought it was the end times. I mean, actually, funny enough, there's a passage in the Bible, speaking of the Bible, where it talks about there's this like church of believers who believed it was the end times, and they were like all worried. And that was, a couple thousand years ago. So people have been, predicting the end times for a while now. My theory is just seek out the truth and prepare for yourself for death at the end of the day.
Amazingly, Allah mentions two seas that meet but don't mix. One fresh and sweet, the other salty and bitter, and between them being a barrier. All of which science has confirmed. Allah states... I
would have to look at the Quran verse specifically there. I guess the argument would be that since wherever Muhammad would have been alive at the time, they wouldn't have had two seas that were salty and fresh next to each other, creating this divide. Although it'd be hard for me to believe that they wouldn't have had any sort of knowledge of salt water and fresh water, having both at some point. And through however experimentation, whatever it would be, that they would see that salt water and fresh water divides itself naturally. So I don't know. I mean, maybe that's in the Quran, maybe not. But I don't know if that's necessarily something I would perceive to be extremely miraculous off the top of my head. Never understood why it matters so much when the end happens. Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at, Moonlit Outlaw. It's kind of where I'm at. Like, I never really quite understood why people worry so much about the end times, mainly because if you prepare yourself for death, you're preparing yourself for the end times at the end of the day. Because it's still going to be judgment day. It's still going to be death, whatever the case. For me, I find it hard to believe that the infinite can be contained in the finite world. If God came into the world, I think he would encompass everything. I think that also has partially to do with our lack of ability to understand what infinite really means. And also, as far as infinite is concerned, to be always existing doesn't necessarily mean to, like, I guess, how do I want to word it? Just because if you always existed, it doesn't necessarily mean that coming into this earth, you don't exist outside of the earth still. It just means that you also are existing on the earth or existing in the earth in that area. It doesn't necessarily mean that now you have contained all your infiniteness into finiteness. In theory, infiniteness would just mean you could be in finiteness at the same time as your infiniteness. I'm not sure if infiniteness is a word now as I say it out loud, but we're going to go with it. I don't think when it was going to happen. Worry about what you prepared for it. A man asked the prophet when it's going to happen and replied, what have you prepared for it? Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it just boils down to whether or not you're preparing for the end times, preparing for death, things like that. So prepare yourself.
How the human is formed, which we have found is in the correct chronological order.
Oh, that's interesting. So actually, fascinating enough. So the embryology one, actually is one I have looked into a bit. So in the Quran, it talks about how, it talks about how Allah attached it to the cord, I think, became a chewed up thing, developed bones, and then developed flesh on that bones, and then we had a created being. That's a rough estimate of how that surah verse that they're referring to breaks down embryology. A couple things to note. One, 1,000 years before Muhammad existed, Aristotle wrote a whole thesis and book about embryology. And it's actually much more detailed than the Quran is. And that was 1,000 years before the Quran. 500 years before the Quran, there was another Greek scholar who wrote his thesis on embryology. Again, more accurate and even more detailed than the Quran. Now, fast forward to the time of the Quran, how would they have any knowledge? Like, the question is, well, without, I forget what that's called. When you rub it over the belly, you can see the baby. I forget what that's called. Sonograph? Either way, how would they know anything about the development stages of a baby without some sort of miraculous or divine revelation? It's actually not that implausible for a couple reasons. One, midwives. Midwives would commonly help deliver children. And mothers would come and would have a lot of stillbirths, especially back in olden times when medicine was a lot less developed. Stillbirths were a lot more popular. Women would die from birth, and it was a lot more complicated. It was a lot more dangerous back then. So you would have these women who would give stillbirth at different phases of life. And at these different phases of life, the stillborn child would come out looking different. It would be more formed farther along in the pregnancy. It would be less formed earlier in the pregnancy. And it's not hard to see that there's some sort of development going on. Plus, it's not hard to reason that the baby is developing and forming inside the womb when the mother's belly keeps getting bigger and bigger as years progress. As the months progress, my bad. And also, another point to be made, he says it's in perfect, shockingly, order. That's not entirely true. I looked into sort of the embryology process and also looked up, doctors explaining embryology process. Bone doesn't come before flesh. If you want to get really technical with it, they actually happen at the same time. So within I forget what it's called, some sort of fluid or whatever, the bones and flesh develop at the exact same time. It's not like the bones are developed and then the flesh is developed. It's exactly the same time. So if you want to get really technical with it, it's not 100% accurate. And also it describes the embryology process in pretty rough terms, which you would have to use some interpretive skills like chewed up thing and stuff. You kind of have to just try to use as much figurative language to interpret that as literally as possible, which I think you're going to be generous if you believe it, and you're going to be critical if you don't.
Allah describes the embryo in shockingly accurate detail. The famous Professor Keith Moore admitted this information could not have been known by man 1400 years ago.
I'm assuming he wasn't aware of the Greeks who did actually have the whole embryology process written down, like Aristotle. So I don't know who this guy is quoting, but he might not have been aware of it, or maybe he's talking about in the Arabian countries specifically. Either way, that's not entirely true.
Yeah. Of the historical signs in the Quran include the preservation of the Pharaoh of Egypt. Both the Bible and the Quran mention that he drowned after Moses, peace be upon him, parted the sea. But the Quran also makes a very unique statement not found in the Bible. Allah says that he will preserve his body and save it as a sign for future generations. The Quran describes the location where the Persian...
So, interesting. So, actually, I did look into that little historical fact as well when I was over the past year of doing my own little study about Islam, Christianity, all these different things. So, interesting enough, so that what they're referring to there, what he's referring to there at least, is in reference to who they believe may have been the Pharaoh at that time. Now, it's important to note, historians aren't 100% certain who was Pharaoh during the time of Moses. There's a debate going on among historians whether or not, who was Pharaoh then. There's I think 2 to 4 different pharaohs that they pose may have been around at the time Moses would have been alive. So, no one is certain who the Pharaoh was in the time of Moses. At least no historian claims to be certain. Now, the 2 that are most commonly asserted, their tombs are preserved. That is true. And the one of those 2 is the ones that the body he showed, Muslims propose is the Pharaoh of the time of Egypt at the time of Moses. Again, it's important to note that no one knows for certain. And secondly, those 2 bodies, one being the one that Muslims often purport to be that body of Pharaoh, both of them have been evaluated, and they both are shown to die from natural causes. Neither of them have signs of drowning or being soaked in water. So it's hard to believe that they would have been the Pharaoh drowned by water, or at the very least, it doesn't really necessarily prove that fact. So it's kind of hard to make that case using that specific argument as well. And so also, it's not necessarily amazing to me that the Pharaoh's body has been preserved. There are dozens and dozens of Pharaoh's bodies that were preserved because that was an Egyptian practice. So as long as they found the body and identified the body as the Pharaoh, they were going to preserve it at some point because that's what they do for pharaohs. So that's not necessarily extremely shocking to me.
Defeated the Romans as the lowest land. Not only have historians derived that the battle took place near the Dead Sea, scientists have confirmed that this location is in fact the lowest point of land on Earth, 417 meters below sea level.
Interesting.
I don't
have much comment on that.
Of previous prophets.
What time I meant to, don't think when it's going to happen, but what I meant is we two religions believe in the second return of Jesus Christ, but when do you think it's going to happen next? No, I knew what you meant. Like, Christians believe that Jesus is going to come back at the end times. Muslims believe that Jesus is going to, at the end times, also come in some sort of fashion. It's a bit different what we believe is going to happen there. But yeah, we both believe Jesus is going to come back at the end times. And what I'm saying is that I don't know. I honestly don't know. And when do I think it's going to happen? Do I think we're living in the end times? I think we might be close. I mean, if I look at the world right now, I would say it looks kind of scary. It looks like things are going downhill. But, I mean, things have been awful for a long time. I mean, World War II, people thought the world was going to end. When Hitler took reign, people thought this was the end of the world. Literally, people thought it was the end of the world. People were making bunkers, and they were like, this is the end. People thought it was the end of the world back during other wars. If you read ancient literature, people thought it was the end of the world every time there was a major war, basically. So, I don't know. We might be in the end times. If you ask me, like, I think we might be close, sure. But everyone seems to think the world's coming to an end when there's war, evil going on. So, I don't know. True, there is theories in the past, but what makes Quran different is the choice of words. Again, I guess it boils down to what you define as your choice of words. I still find some of the miracles I looked into as far as the wording goes. Again, as far as the embryology process went, the words as long, like, again, maybe I don't know Arabic, and you could argue that since I don't know Arabic, that means I'm going to automatically be wrong. But the English translations of that verse were very, very much figurative, like chewed up thing or clot hanging. It's extremely vague and general that it could mean that, and also it's just, I don't know, it's just to me it wasn't necessarily, it's not very specific. If you were going to make a claim that the Quran contains like scientific miracles, I would at least expect it to be more specific and also more accurate, like spot on accurate. The fact that there's ambiguity and the fact that it's not 100% accurate, meaning that bones don't come before flesh and stuff like that. If you're going to make the claim that's directly from God, I would expect it to be almost like perfectly accurate. If your claim is that scientific facts prove the Quran. Now, you can make the claim that scientific facts don't prove the Quran, that it's true because of its historical merit. Okay, I'm fine with that. Like, you might be able to say that these verses about scientific stuff, they aren't meant to be like exactly specific. They're meant to be, I don't know, analogies for things, or they're meant to be, just general principles, things like that. I'm fine with that. But if you're going to make the argument that no, this is like a defiant scientific claim that I'm going to stake my ground in, and God revealed it to prove that it's the Quran, I guess I would expect it to be more accurate. That's all I'm saying. When you have hundreds of coincidences and events, you just heedless to the truth. Greek said sperm comes from brain. I mean, sure. I mean, Greeks might have said sperm comes from brain. I don't know what that has necessarily to do with the comment about whether or not embryology, their theories on embryology were accurate or not. And as far as coincidences and evidences go, potentially you're right. I mean, I've looked at different of the coincidences and evidences, and I haven't found them overly compelling yet. I mean, I've read multiple books on the topic. For instance, I don't know if this video is going to go. I think the video gets into different ones, like the mathematical things as well, and some of the other things like that. Which again, we'll jump into that. We'll jump into that later. But as far as some of these coincidences and stuff go, I don't find them to be miraculous. Sometimes I find them to be somewhat contradictory, or not as amazing as I guess someone else would, and also, there are numerous, I guess you could say, coincidences that you could point out in other religions, belief systems, stuff like that people point to. So if you look at Christianity, I know, for instance, a lot of people will point to the Messiah prophecies coming true within the Bible, proving that the Bible is true. Or they will point out that the tribes, like the number 12 and 7, have a common theme throughout the Bible, therefore proving it's true. So if you want to look at like coincidences, numbers, stuff like that, multiple religions make those claims, and multiple religions have coincidences. It's bound to happen over thousands and thousands of years, over thousands of words. You're bound to find patterns and things like that. I don't necessarily find that to be necessarily overly compelling. Of course, nothing will be shocking to you, but what really is shocking is to believe that human killed God. Of course. So interestingly enough, as far as that's concerned, there's always that misconception about when we say, like, when we talk about Jesus dying, that God Himself, like the spiritual being, ceased to exist, eternal, infinite, just came to an end for 3 days and then rose again, which is not our belief. Our belief is that the flesh, the human flesh of Jesus died, although His spirit still lived on. So there was never an ending or a killing, quote unquote, of God in that sense.
Not many people know that Moses, peace be upon him, is the most frequently mentioned name. The Quran also narrates many stories about Jesus Christ, peace be upon him. Mary, the mother of Jesus, is regarded as one of the best women to walk the face of the earth and has a whole chapter to herself.
Interesting.
Why these story signs? Because there is no way they were plagiarized. In that time, there was not a single library or translation of the Bible available.
Now, I'm not sure if he's making a claim that there was no translation or version of the Bible available in where Muhammad lived, because if he's saying across the spectrum of the world, that wouldn't be true at all. I mean, you have manuscripts of the Bible as early as before 100 AD, like from 40 to 60 AD, 30 to 40 AD, maybe even before that a little bit. You have manuscripts of the Bible, New Testament, stuff like that being written. You have some other religious texts as well that have been around for long periods of time. And as far as like the Bible is concerned, or as far as those things are concerned, there have been books and collections of them since 300 AD. And there have been letters and stuff of the New Testament spread across Europe, spread across Asia, spread across the world, and they spread pretty fast after the starting of Christianity. So there was numerous written texts from the Bible. And there was compilations of the Bible, small ones of the New Testament, of the letters and stuff, in the early hundreds of AD, before Muhammad's time and around Muhammad's time. And also, many people had these and memorized these, and there was a lot of Christians and Jews who lived near and around Muhammad. So he would have been exposed to stories about Moses, Joseph, Abraham, and all them, because he lived among Jews and Christians. Muhammad lived among Jews and Christians. I mean, this isn't something that's debated, because even in the Quran, he talks about interacting with Jews and Christians. In the Hadith, he talks about interacting with Jews and Christians. He would have been with Jews and Christians, so he would have been exposed to stories of Joseph, Moses, and stuff like that. So it's not actually surprising to me that in the Quran and in Hadith and stuff, you can find a lot of stories about Joseph, Mary, and these different Bible characters you can find in the Bible, and there being a pretty close parallel between the two, because he would have talked to Christians and Jews. He would have heard their stories and tales. He would have heard about the Bible, and there would have been manuscripts around at the time. So I don't know. I don't really find that compelling from a historical standpoint.
There are also many linguistic miracles in the Quran. Modern research shows that the Quran follows a remarkable structure called ring composition. Let's take chapter 2 of the Quran as an example. This chapter can be split into 9 groups based on the theme of the group. The first group mirrors the last group, the second group mirrors the second to last group, and so on. What's more is that there are sub-rings inside each group. In other words, rings inside of rings. If we look at group 8, we find yet another ring inside of that ring. There are also countless other occurrences.
So interesting about, like, he's talking about the structure of the Quran and kind of like the parallelism and stuff. The argument for that would be if Muhammad had divine revelation and they came from a whim and actually he just shared the revelation as it came to him, it's surprising or shocking that there would be a pattern, or you could observe a pattern. That would be the traditional argument. It's dependent on the fact that you trust the fact that the Quran has been perfectly preserved. So you would have to believe that the Quran has been perfectly preserved, hasn't been edited, retouched, or messed with whatsoever at all over the course of the years. So you're assuming a premise from the start. Secondly, just because he had, I guess you could say he recited something or whatever, someone who would be on the more skeptical side could say that maybe Muhammad did actually, like, when he told it, had patterns in his head. Maybe, who knows? At the end of the day, to me, from my own perspective, finding patterns, stuff like that, it's interesting. It's cool. Does it mean it's true? Not necessarily. I mean, that doesn't necessarily make it true, but it is interesting. I mean, it is pretty cool. Pretty cool fact. I haven't verified it. I don't know if what he says is true or not, but it's interesting.
Such as the word day, in its singular, being mentioned 365 times, and the word month 12 times. The word life is mentioned the same number of times as death, angels the same number as devils, good deeds the same as bad deeds, and belief the same as disbelief. These are only just a few examples.
That's also interesting. That's an interesting point to make. Again, I wouldn't know necessarily. I didn't necessarily delve into the linguistics of the Quran to see if there's an even number of these things. I've heard a little podcast on the topic, kind of like, the debate of it, why they make these claims, how they make these claims about the equal numbers of words. Some of it boils down to how generous they are with certain words and phrases. So there are people who, again, don't fully agree with their assessment or think they're being too generous with certain words, saying that they mean this or they mean that. But again, like to me, that's not necessarily a proof that something's true. That's just, it's interesting. But again, you would have to delve into the linguistics to prove that. I don't know. I would have to take his word for it on that one.
Additionally, the Quran describes death, the Day of Judgment, heaven, and hell in such vivid detail. In fact, you can hardly find a page in the Quran that doesn't mention the Day of Judgment. All of that whilst presenting a complete way of life for us to follow.
I guess that's interesting. I don't know if I would find that as evidence, because there's other religions that share about the end times, and there's other religions that share about a way of living. I mean, that's often what religions do. They give you an ideology of how to live life, and they talk a lot about the end times. You could argue that maybe they're not complete or that they're contradictory, whatever, but just the fact that they propose them doesn't necessarily make them true or false. But we all die with our souls will still live, so that's really special because the soul doesn't die whether you are Jesus or anyone else. Yeah, I mean, I agree that the soul in of itself doesn't die, but that's kind of my point. The flesh would die, but not the spirit or soul, as you want to call it. The Bible has extensive prophecy of the Prophet Muhammad. I've looked into the prophecies about Prophet Muhammad. So, for instance, in Deuteronomy 24, I think they say it's a prophecy of Muhammad. I think John something they say it's a prophecy of Muhammad. I've read them. By best available context and evidence, when you read the whole book of the Bible that they were referring to, it doesn't refer anything to Muhammad. The one they in Deuteronomy, they say, well, Muhammad's more like Moses and Jesus is like Moses, so therefore the prophecy must be about Muhammad. Although when you read it in context, it's not prophesying about Muhammad, it's prophesying about Jesus. So that's Deuteronomy 24, I think it is. And as far as some of the John ones, some of the other ones I looked at, they're not prophesying about Muhammad. Within context of the Bible, they're prophesying about other prophets or future things in the New Testament. And so, I mean, again, I read those verses and stuff, but I didn't find them to be prophecies of Muhammad. Who's the second son of Ishmael, bound to prick. Not assumption. The verse of the Quran is dependent on the things that happened during the lifetime of the prophet. So if you say you play in the Quran, then you must agree that he knows the future. I'm not entirely sure if I'm following you on that one. It just hit me. I'm late, but it said in the Bible that mountains are responsible for balance, because in the Quran the verse talks only about the roots of maintain, not the balance. No, the Bible didn't. The Bible, I understand, the Bible doesn't necessarily talk about the balance, like the roots stabilizing or balancing the earth. Even though, again, I'm going to put it out there though, we as Christians, we don't look to the Bible for necessarily quote unquote scientific research. We don't necessarily think the Bible used science as a means to prove itself per se. And as far as the places where you'll find the mountains have roots, they're in poetry. So Job and Psalms are two that you'll find that talks about mountains having roots. They're both in poetic form. So more likely than not, they're supposed to be figurative. They're not meant to be taken literally. So all that to say is that was something that writers would use figuratively, at least back in the ancient times, by our best assessment. But it's just interesting to note that it's not only the Quran that mentions something like that.
In Islam, anything that causes harm is not allowed, and everything that is beneficial and good is encouraged. Why is there harm? Because life is a test. Allah says in the Quran, "He who created death and life to test which of you are best indeed." Islam develops your character, it teaches you how to carry yourself and how to be in control. Islam protects and empowers women. It eliminates racism, terrorism, and all oppression. A good Muslim is one who people feel safe around from their actions and words.
So, I guess as far as that's concerned, like that's the ultimate, I guess you would say, goal of Islam. And I think people would argue the ultimate goal of religion in general is to create a healthy, peaceful, good society, I suppose you would say. Now, I guess my only pushback would be if someone would be skeptical, they would argue that, well, people have used the Quran or people have used the Hadith for the things he mentioned, oppression, terrorism, things like that. I don't believe that most Muslims are that way. I don't personally believe that. At least Muslims I've met are nice, friendly, loving, kind people. So I don't personally necessarily believe that, but people would point to the fact of like terrorist groups or certain countries or certain regimes, and they would argue that those are oppressive, those are terroristic, things like that. You could point to the vast majority of Muslims and say they're peaceful. So in that case, then yeah. But I guess some people would argue that would be the pushback. Again, I don't necessarily believe that. I believe that Muslims in general tend to be, all the ones I've met have been friendly, good, and kind to me. So I have no reason to be biased against them in that regard. But that would be the only thing I could see someone saying and push back to that. But again, that's more of a subjective statement based on what you would consider societally healthy or beneficial for society.
One who people trust and one who people look up to. A huge part of understanding why the Quran is a miracle is understanding how it was revealed. The Quran came down over 23 years in spoken form. It was not written down. Once verses came down, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, recited them, and his companions memorized them. Unlike any other book, the Quran did not go through an editing process. Once the verse was spoken, it was done. That was the final version. The verses were not revealed in order, starting from chapter 1, verse 1, 2, 3, and so on. The chapters and verses were revealed out of sequence. Furthermore, they could not be planned ahead of time. They were revealed as a result of life experiences that were out of the Prophet's control, such as enemies challenging him or the believers asking him life questions. To summarize, the Quran has been perfectly preserved.
So interesting, I guess, about the how the Quran was revealed, things like that. Again, not everyone from a historical standpoint agrees with that, and you can say that they all been debunked or proven wrong. Maybe when you listen to debates and you look at the evidence, that's what you come to the conclusion of. So far, the debates I've listened to and the things I've listened to, I don't come to that conclusion. But that as being laid aside, not everyone necessarily would agree with that and I'm not even just talking about laymen or people who make YouTube videos. I'm talking about actual historians and people who study these things for their life. Not everyone agrees. There's always debate going on. So I think from that standpoint, it's just interesting. But again, I would just reference you to scholars. So look up Muslim historian scholars, look at how they defend it, and look up Christian, atheists, other historian scholars. So I know actually, for instance, Bart Ehrman, I think is his name. A lot of Muslims in my comments say, well, what do you think about Bart Ehrman? He's not a Muslim and he thinks the Bible is historically inaccurate. Well, also, newsflash, he thinks the Quran's also historically inaccurate. So I guess I guess if you're going to raise atheist historians that disagree with the Bible, they often also disagree with the Quran. So Bart Ehrman, for instance, has a lot of books and videos and stuff on why he believes the Quran and the Bible aren't historically accurate. You have people like Gary Habermas, who proposes why the Bible is historically accurate. You have people like Josh McDowell and Sean McDowell, who propose why the Bible is historically accurate. You have other philosophers who would propose why the Quran is accurate, like Yusuf, whatever, I forget his name. So again, there's different historians. You can read the evidence, look into it, because history is one of those things where you have tons of evidence and tons of narrative to look through and sift through. So if you want to do a due diligence search into it, dive right into it. But I just will say again, not everyone necessarily agrees with that claim.
Changed for 14 centuries whilst excelling linguistically, scientifically, historically, and mathematically. It has a profound impact on those who listen to it and is memorized and recited by hundreds of millions of people worldwide. It brings forth a complete way of life and fills the hearts with peace and purpose.
And again, I think the one thing about this video that I find weak is that he relies pretty heavily on subjective experiences. Because I've met people who left Islam saying that it didn't bring them peace and happiness and satisfaction. It brings some people that. Some people claim that they follow Islam, they have peace, satisfaction, and happiness. I also know many Christians who claim to have peace, satisfaction, and happiness because of Christianity. I know Muslims Buddhists and Hindus. Well, not Hindus, but I have met a Buddhist who claim these sort of things where they claim I'm satisfied because of my religion. So that's just a subjective experience that isn't necessarily a proof in of itself.
Humanity is yet to rise to its challenges as Allah promised, and it's safe to say that no matter what angle you look at the Quran, it shows no weakness. Allah says, if you are in doubt, then produce even a chapter like it. Then he says, call upon your witnesses. In other words, go ahead, work in a team.
Interestingly enough, there's I forget what the book's called, Al-Faraq, Al-Harraq, I forget. It's like in Arabic. It's in Arabic, but I forget exactly how to say it. But basically, that book takes verses from the Bible and basically reorients them into a way that it sounds like the Quran and reads like the Quran, and was read and made and translated into Arabic and then read to Muslims and stuff. And supposedly they couldn't tell the difference between the Quran and that book. That I'm not going to put much weight onto, but apparently that has happened. So I've heard people say that request has been met. So I just think that's interesting enough. Now, the one thing I don't know if he's. I'll finish off this video before I continue.
Of humanity and try your best. He then seals the challenge by saying, "If you do not, and you will never be able to." 1400 years have passed, and no book, or text, or speech in any language comes close to competing with the quality, eloquence, and perfection of the Quran.
So, interesting about that argument, I think that I find, is that I've listened to the Quran in Arabic. I've listened to, I won't say all the Quran, but chunks of the Quran in Arabic. I've read the whole Quran in English. I'd still much rather read other books and much rather listen to other songs and books. Does that mean that, what does that mean? If it is the most eloquent, most beautiful book out there, especially if in Arabic, and I listen to it, and it's the words, eternal words of God, why am I not moved? This is because I guess the argument would be that I'm not truly seeking truth, or I'm not truly wanting God, or I guess that would have to be the argument, although I would find that hard to believe in a sense that if it is the most beautiful, eloquent book, and pretty much no one could deny that, then why do millions of people deny its eloquence and not recognize it and not find it eloquent or beautiful or appealing? I think that's a subjective argument. I don't find that very compelling, especially when there's a lot of people out there who don't find it to be that beautiful or eloquent. But again, if you're predisposed to believe it is holy, you're going to automatically be biased to believe it's eloquent.
A lot of people think if they follow Islam, they're going to deprive themselves of things they would have otherwise enjoyed. Actually, the opposite is true.
Yeah, that's true about a lot of things, though.
If we live life
a lot of
by
people
His book,
believe that they follow moral code, though.
Life becomes so much better and easier. The freedom, peace, and harmony found in the heart of a true Muslim cannot be described until it is experienced. Allah has given us countless signs. Will we continue turning our backs?
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم سنريهم آياتنا في الآفاق وفي أنفسهم حتى يتبين لهم أنه الحق.
Okay, interesting. I do find these type of things interesting because it is always fascinating to me to learn how people defend their faith, the arguments proposed about Islam itself, all that stuff. So I did find this interesting. I found this insightful. I give you my honest thoughts, and I appreciate all your questions and stuff like that. These things that historians get wrecked. I've watched the debate, man. I don't agree with you. I don't think they get wrecked. But hey, if you believe they get wrecked, That's I guess your assessment of the arguments. Bart Ehrman admitted he changed his stance when was on a Muslim podcast. Perhaps I'd be intrigued by that, but I just watched something by Bart Ehrman a few days ago live, and he dismantles. He supposedly, again, this is coming from a skeptic's perspective, he supposedly dismantles Islam and the Quran. So that was something I just watched recently live from Bart Ehrman. Like, he was live in the flesh just a few days ago. So I find it hard to believe, but okay. But expectations don't break the rule. But the challenge is not that. It has to be more compelling than the shortest chapter, which has over 50 linguistics dividing, including prophecy. You didn't see my comment before, so I will comment again. Please check out Sex in the Bible. Made to that Kano Game Solver, and go check the source yourself and give us your thoughts. Okay, I might have to check that out sometime. I'm assuming that's in reference to your comment about the Bible being pornographic, which again, I'm assuming I know what he's talking about. I would probably disagree with him, but I can check it out. We'll see. It's 8:04. It has been an hour of a live stream, and I got more to do tonight, like usual. So thank you guys for tuning in. As always, I appreciate the conversations. I appreciate all the good live streams, the comments, suggestions, things like that. And yeah, I'm going to continue to make videos out there, continue to talk about my opinions, my thoughts, and assessing different religions, Islam being one of them, but also other religions, and continually delving into these topics. So thank you for tuning in. Thank you for joining, everyone. And as always, before I close out, friends, go out there and light the world yourselves.